Well, our new Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, in Iraq today, where the U.S. combat, we're told, has ended. Well, you wouldn't know that if you were one of the 50,000 American troops still in the region. They now find themselves in the middle of increasing violence and conflict, with a rash of recent attacks targeting American troops. In fact, fatally so. June, the deadliest in 2 years for American soldiers in Iraq.
Al-Qaeda is still out there. We see it here in Iraq. They continue to remain a force that will try to attack our country. And so we've got to continue the job of going after them.
Panetta also addressing concerns about Iranian weapons making it into the hands of Iraq's Shiite militias, something he calls a, quote, tremendous concern. Meantime, in Afghanistan over the weekend, the defense secretary claiming U.S. forces are within reach of breaking al-Qaeda. We're almost there. Granted, there's only about 24 of them, but we're almost ready to break them. And as we've learned, al-Qaeda, of course, not the real threat. A new book raises questions about the methods we use to fight the war on terror in general. The author, Glenn Carle, is a former spy at the CIA. The book called The Interrogator, an Education. Portions of the book redacted by the Central Intelligence Agency. And Mr. Carle, it's a pleasure to meet you electronically. Why did you write this book, and what are you hoping to achieve?
Thank you very much. I wrote it for two reasons, patriotic ones and personal ones. I was proud to serve my country for my career for 23 years. I think we're all proud of our country, and we want our country to live up to the ideals that we believe it embodies and that I took an oath to serve. I also am one of the only ones who has firsthand experience in the interrogation policies that we have used since 9/11. And I wrote it for personal reasons, too, because my experience, I think, is representative of how all Americans would feel if they were involved in what I was involved in, which was very disturbing, and I think actually betrayed the values that we are seeking to protect.
Specifically, what are you referring to?
Well, interrogation is an important thing to do, obviously, when you capture somebody, and obtaining intelligence in order to save lives and to disrupt or take down al-Qaeda. We all wanted to do that, and certainly I wanted to do that. The agency didn't have experience in interrogation when 9/11 occurred, and certainly I didn't. I was an operations officer. But when I was brought in to do this, I found that the skills that are required are the same ones that are those of convincing someone to provide secrets to the United States. And they are developing human rapport, not using coercive measures.
And in the book, do you argue that the development of rapport and trust is a far more valuable means of extracting information than coercion of some kind?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was told at the beginning of the operation, of the interrogation that I led for several months of a fellow I call Captus, that I would do whatever it took to get the man to talk. Did I understand? And I did. The theory is that psychologically dislocating a detainee will make him more likely to share or to give up information. You do that by using physical or psychological measures. You disorient the person and more or less separate him from himself by changing the temperature and time and diet and so on. I refused to use any physical measure from the get-go, and I found quickly that the psychological measures aren't effective either, as well as being wrong. And the way to do it correctly is to develop a human rapport. That's what all conversation and all exchanges are based on. The same job I did as an operations officer.
Is your ultimate assertion that not forget your individual story, not that it's not incredibly compelling, but that the entire agency that is Central Intelligence has been misguided by using coercive interrogation as opposed to rapport and trust building?
Yeah, well, I make 2 points. My story about the individual I call Captus, I believe is a compelling one and an important one for me as I live through it, but it's really representative of the larger issue that you touch on, which is not just what the CIA did, but what the entire United States did in response to the attacks of 9/11. What was the war on terror? What was the nature of our adversary? What were the methods we used? How effective were they? And how acceptable were they to American values? And I found, to my distress, that the methods that we used for a time undermined the values that I took an oath to preserve and protect.
And to the best of your knowledge today, how big is the gap between the sorts of values that you and I and most people in this country would likely describe at a barbecue or a picnic and the reality?
Well, when some of these measures and the programs became public around 2005, many of them were suspended. That was not a voluntary decision. It was a response to a scandal, actually, at that time. When President Obama took office, he immediately repudiated most of them, but I believe they've been suspended and not formally stopped. And we just recently heard General Petraeus and others say that in some instances, possibly measures beyond those of the Geneva Convention would be called for. And I think this is wrong. But more importantly than what happens out of sight to most Americans, I think, is what has all of this done? What do the secret programs do to us as a society? And there was a poll that showed that Americans under 35, a majority of them now support, in some instances, torture. I find this appalling. It's not an American value.
Beyond the acceptance that you describe of younger Americans of the practice of torture, how do you, can you evaluate America's relationship with the world in the context of the behavior of the past 10 years?
Well, of course, the Geneva Conventions are not something that we subject ourselves to at a disadvantage. They were actually written by Eleanor Roosevelt, who represented the United States in the convention, the conference that wrote them. They embody American values, our Bill of Rights. We have, I think, 1,500,000 men and women in uniform and thousands upon thousands of security officers and intelligence officers around the world and American citizens around the world. These values and obligations protect us. We don't want our soldiers to be subjected to things that exceed the Geneva Convention either. So only by embodying the values that we subscribe to can we expect, possibly, that will in fact happen.
There are those who argue that our behavior, in fact, has alienated many on this planet. No, I don't mean just our interrogation tactics being one in a stack of responses post 9/11. What is your view on the degree to which we have alienated huge factions around the world that may have been more sympathetic to a gentleman like yourself 10 or 15 years ago seeking to build rapport?
Well, I don't know if CIA officers will ever be very well liked overseas if they're known, but we have done ourselves a significant amount of harm and harmed our own interests. Now, I do not say that we simply need to be nice, not at all. America should promote and defend, act in its own self-interest. That's what our mission is, to serve American interests. And often that will not make other countries happy, but that's okay. What is not okay is that we act in ways that betray our values. That creates problems for us we can avoid and that we don't need to do. We can embody these values and promote our own interests at the same time.
Very quickly, do you think the reason we revert to some of this really basic and violent techniques is how much of that is triggered simply by fear on our own part? When you're really afraid, you tend to lash out like this, no?
Yes, I think there's a lot of that to explain what happened. 9/11 was terrible. We were all angry. I was angry like everybody else. I wanted to be part of the hunt for Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Every officer in the CIA did, of course. But we did react, I think, viscerally without thinking about our own interests. We had no experience in the agency and much of the government in how to interrogate somebody. We should have listened to the FBI, which does know how to do this, and which was sterling, frankly, from the beginning in this. They refused to have any involvement in enhanced interrogation techniques, knowing that they don't work and that they betray our values.
Yeah.
That's what we should have done.
Well, it's never too late. The only thing that exists is infinite potential anyway, Mr. Carle. So we're here today, and we'll see what happens. Glenn Carle, the book, The Interrogator and Education. Congratulations on a brave effort on your part to publish such a document of your own experience and also your perspective.